Emma's mother-in-law gave her a diamond necklace for her birthday. Everyone saw a gift. Emma sensed a warning. What she uncovered next changed everything. Emma sat at her desk by the tall window of their Brooklyn apartment, her fingers gliding over the digital sketchpad. The soft hum of traffic outside blended with the faint instrumental music playing through her wireless earbuds. The room was neat but full of small touches that hinted at her personality: mood boards pinned beside the monitor, swatches of velvet and linen draped over the chair behind her, and a vintage lamp glowing beside her coffee cup. She was putting the finishing touches on a design proposal for a new client, a boutique hotel opening in Soho. The concept was minimal but warm, filled with natural textures and custom pieces. Outside, the late afternoon sun dipped between buildings, casting amber light across her workspace. The colors lit her hair, making it look warmer than usual, and she smiled slightly at how the sunlight always made things feel more manageable. The client deadline was close, but she felt in control, even inspired. The click of a key in the door brought her out of her focus. She heard it open, followed by the familiar sound of dress shoes on hardwood. Daniel had returned. She paused her music and turned as he walked in, looking slightly tired but still carrying the composed air he always wore. His tie was already half loosened, and the faint creases around his eyes softened when he smiled at her. He set down his leather bag near the entryway and leaned against the counter, asking how her day had gone. She explained her progress with the hotel design, how the client had finally approved her vision board, and how she had only a few more hours of layout work before the proposal was ready. Her voice was calm, but inside she was proud of herself. He nodded, impressed, and shared a brief rundown of his own day: meetings, emails, and the usual chaos at the office. It was a routine exchange, familiar and warm. He brought up her upcoming birthday as he poured himself a glass of water. There was a lightness in his tone, as though he were leading into a surprise. He mentioned that his mother had called earlier and said she had something special planned for the occasion. He seemed genuinely hopeful, as if this gesture might be a step forward. Emma's expression didn't change much, but inside, her chest tightened. The word special carried too much history. She thanked him, nodded, and returned her attention to the tablet. He didn't press the subject further, perhaps sensing the shift in her mood. They talked about dinner plans instead. The evening unfolded as most of their evenings did. Emma made a light meal, and they ate together on the small balcony outside, watching the city's glow come to life. As planes blinked across the sky and sirens whispered from distant streets, she allowed herself to relax. Daniel, for all his loyalty to his mother, had never made her feel second in his life. He loved her openly, supported her career, and respected her boundaries. But some things couldn't be explained by love alone. Victoria Carter, his mother, had always carried herself like royalty. From her manicured nails to her silk scarves, everything about her was calculated. She wasn't cruel, not exactly. There were no dramatic insults or emotional outbursts. Instead, she wielded control with soft remarks and elegant dismissals. At dinners, she'd compliment Emma's ambition but question the stability of freelance work. During holidays, she gave lavish gifts with subtle commentary, kitchenware implying domestic expectations, or books on etiquette masked as casual recommendations. Daniel never saw the sharp edges behind his mother's words. He thought she was traditional, maybe too proud, but ultimately well-meaning. Emma never challenged his view directly. She knew that if she tried to explain how Victoria's words felt like warnings, or how her smiles always seemed too precise, it would sound like paranoia. So she kept her observations private, sharing only what was necessary. After dinner, they watched a movie. Emma's mind wandered more than once. She thought of past birthdays, how last year, Victoria had given her a set of crystal wine glasses and then remarked how real elegance came from restraint. 2 years ago, it was a luxury perfume she wasn't sure would suit Emma's style, but perhaps it would grow on her. Always something valuable, always paired with some small reminder that she didn't quite fit. Now, the idea of something special, arriving from Victoria didn't feel generous. It felt like a test, another offering meant to look like kindness, but weighed down with unspoken terms. Emma couldn't explain this without sounding suspicious, and so she said nothing. Later that night, after Daniel had gone to bed, Emma stayed at her desk a little longer. She flipped through her sketchbook, the pages filled with color palettes, floor plans, and scribbled ideas. Her career was something she had built herself, piece by piece, through clients, referrals, late nights, and slow-growing confidence. It was the one thing she could always fall back on, even when everything else felt uncertain. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the city never truly slept, but inside, everything was still. She glanced over at the calendar on her wall. Her birthday was in 3 days. A small dinner had been planned, just close friends and family. Daniel had taken care of the reservations. Victoria had insisted on attending. Emma hadn't argued. She closed her sketchbook and turned off the lamp. In the dark, her reflection appeared in the window, a faint silhouette against the city lights. She wasn't afraid of Victoria, but she couldn't pretend that something wasn't coming. Whether it was another polished criticism or an overwhelming gesture, she could already feel it hovering just out of reach. Walking into the bedroom, she slipped under the covers beside Daniel, who was already asleep. His breathing was even, his hand resting loosely on the edge of the blanket. She lay still for a while, eyes open, thoughts spinning quietly. There was something about the way Victoria gave gifts that felt like handing someone a key to a locked door. The problem was never the key itself, it was what waited behind that door. The restaurant sat atop a quiet building near Central Park, its rooftop enclosed in glass, giving guests a view of the city without the bite of the autumn wind. Small string lights hung overhead, flickering gently as the last of the evening sun dipped below the skyline. A long table had been arranged with care, linen napkins, hand-picked floral arrangements, and name cards placed in delicate holders. Emma noticed the attention to detail and appreciated it. She had always admired things done with thought. The gathering had started with familiar voices and clinking glasses. Close friends from her college years, a few work acquaintances, and Daniel's cousins, all people she liked and trusted. Laughter came easily. For the first hour, she was able to forget the weight pressing gently at the back of her mind. The soft music, the shared memories, and the warm embraces created a sense of calm. Daniel had done most of the organizing. He had remembered what wine she liked, what desserts she preferred, and what kind of atmosphere would make her feel comfortable. She glanced at him across the table, watching him talk with one of his uncles. He looked happy, relaxed. That was what she wanted most, for both of them to feel that way more often. But the ease didn't last. Just past 7, the elevator doors at the far end of the terrace opened, and Victoria stepped out, escorted by a waiter. She wore a long gray coat over a deep blue dress, her silver hair styled in soft waves, and her expression composed. The chatter at the table lowered, just slightly, and a few people stood to greet her. She made her way to the table with practiced grace, stopping to kiss Daniel on the cheek before turning to Emma. Her greeting was polite, her smile measured, her voice smooth. Emma responded in kind, rising from her chair to return the gesture. They held each other's eyes for a brief moment, no longer than a breath, but enough to acknowledge that the evening had now taken a different shape. After pleasantries, Victoria handed her coat to the waiter and sat between Daniel and one of his aunts. Conversation resumed, though its rhythm had changed. Emma noticed the way Victoria listened, always listening, with her head tilted slightly and her fingers gently tapping the tablecloth. Dinner was served, and Emma allowed herself to rejoin the moment. The food was excellent, and her friends kept the atmosphere light with stories and jokes. For a while, it seemed manageable. Then, as the dessert plates were being cleared, Victoria stood. She tapped her spoon gently against her glass. The room quieted. With everyone's attention on her, Victoria reached into her purse and removed a small black box tied with a white ribbon. She held it with both hands, looking straight at Emma. She spoke calmly, saying she had brought something meaningful, something passed down through generations of Carter women. It was, she explained, a token of grace and heritage. The room was still, the kind of stillness that wrapped itself around expectation. She walked to Emma and extended the box. Emma stood, accepting it with both hands. Her heart beat faster as she untied the ribbon and opened the lid. Inside lay a necklace. Not just any necklace, this one caught the light like water, each diamond cut to perfection, arranged in a delicate yet deliberate pattern. It sparkled with an intensity that felt almost unreal. A quiet murmur passed through the guests. Emma felt the pressure of eyes on her. She smiled, careful to keep it soft and appreciative. She said thank you. She closed the box gently and held it to her chest. Victoria's voice came again. She mentioned that the necklace had once belonged to her own grandmother, a woman remembered for strength and dignity. Now, she said, it belonged to Emma. A symbol of welcome. A mark of trust. The applause that followed felt distant. Emma returned to her seat, placing the box on the table in front of her. Daniel looked proud. He leaned over to kiss her temple, whispering something warm. She nodded and smiled, but her hands stayed folded in her lap. Later, when the guests began saying their goodbyes and the table slowly emptied, Victoria lingered. She spoke with a few relatives before making her way back to Emma. Her voice lowered just enough that no one else could hear. She said she hoped Emma would wear the necklace soon. Perhaps at the next family gathering. She added that it suited her better than anyone expected. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Emma responded with polite words, thanking her again. She held the box delicately, as though it might tip and spill something dangerous. Daniel wrapped an arm around her waist as they stepped into the elevator. He looked happy. He said his mother was trying, that the necklace meant something, that perhaps things were finally shifting. Emma nodded, resting her head against his shoulder. The elevator descended, slow and smooth. Back at home, she placed the necklace box on her dresser. She didn't open it again. Instead, she sat at the edge of the bed, staring at it for several minutes. The necklace wasn't just a gift. It felt like a message, carefully delivered, beautifully wrapped, but heavy with something unspoken. The diamonds glittered even through the closed lid, as if they knew more than they let on. Emma changed into her pajamas and turned off the lights. She lay beside Daniel, who fell asleep quickly, unaware of the unease that had settled in the room. She closed her eyes, the image of the necklace still vivid in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that accepting it had been a mistake. The morning after the dinner arrived quietly, with soft gray light slipping through the curtains. Emma lay still for a moment, listening to the subtle sounds of the apartment waking up, distant car horns, footsteps in the hallway, the low hum of the refrigerator. Daniel had already left for work, his side of the bed cool. He had kissed her cheek before leaving, whispering something about an early meeting. She barely remembered it. She rose slowly, her body moving as if reluctant. In the bathroom, she splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection. Her eyes looked tired. The previous night had left an invisible weight resting on her shoulders, one that she hadn't managed to shake off during sleep. Back in the bedroom, the box still sat where she had left it, untouched on the dresser. Its presence felt louder in the quiet room. She picked it up and turned it over in her hands, still closed, still sealed from the inside world. There was no note tucked inside, no inscription or message, nothing except what had been said aloud in front of the others. Yet the necklace carried something beyond its sparkle, something that couldn't be explained with words. She sat at the edge of the bed and opened the lid slowly. The necklace glimmered in the morning light. Each diamond looked sharp, polished, flawless. The design was intricate, vintage, but not outdated. The craftsmanship was undeniable. It was beautiful. That was the truth. But there was another truth too, one that lingered in her gut. Emma held it up, letting it catch the light. For a brief moment, she considered trying it on. Her fingers touched the clasp. It was cool, almost icy. She moved to stand in front of the mirror and draped the necklace around her neck without securing it. The diamonds rested against her skin, heavy and cold. She studied her reflection. The necklace looked striking, elegant, even regal. But as she adjusted the chain, she couldn't shake the feeling that it didn't belong to her, not in the way Victoria had implied. It didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a statement. A small voice in her mind reminded her of Victoria's expression the night before, the way she had spoken of legacy and worth. The subtle tone suggesting that wearing the necklace was more than appreciation, it was expectation, obligation, compliance. She removed it carefully and placed it back in the box. She closed the lid and pushed the box to the far corner of the dresser. It would stay there until she figured out what to do with it. The rest of the day passed slowly. Emma tried to focus on her design work, but her attention drifted. She opened her tablet, reviewed client notes, adjusted mood boards, and reorganized her schedule. But the unease followed her like a shadow. By mid-afternoon, she gave up trying to concentrate. She stepped away from her desk and brewed a fresh pot of tea. As the kettle boiled, she glanced at her phone and saw a new message from Victoria. The text was short and polite. She had enjoyed the evening and was glad Emma liked the necklace. Emma replied with a brief thank you, her fingers moving slower than usual. She didn't add anything else. The conversation ended there. Later, when Daniel returned, his energy filled the apartment. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, asking about her day, making small jokes about the chaos at work. He didn't notice the box had been moved, or that Emma's responses were slightly quieter than usual. He brought up the party again, said his mother seemed genuinely pleased. He even mentioned how nice it was that she was trying. He didn't say the word finally, but Emma heard it anyway. He asked whether she had tried on the necklace again. She smiled and said she had, just briefly, but wasn't sure when she'd wear it. He nodded, unbothered, assuming it was simply her taste. He offered to take her to dinner over the weekend, maybe somewhere new. They ate takeout on the couch and watched an old movie. Emma leaned against him, trying to let the familiarity of their evening erase the tension still curled inside her. She laughed at the right scenes, sipped her wine, and responded when he spoke. But a small part of her stayed distant, watching herself from the outside. That night, she had trouble sleeping. The necklace occupied her thoughts, not just its shape or weight, but what it represented. She couldn't quite name the feeling. It wasn't fear, not exactly. More like caution. Suspicion without evidence. Doubt without cause. Lying in bed, she imagined scenarios. Victoria giving the necklace with good intentions, Victoria offering it with calculation, Victoria waiting to see whether Emma would wear it. Each version made sense in its own way, but none of them felt harmless. She thought of all the gifts she had received from her mother-in-law over the years. They were always expensive, always tasteful, but they always seemed to say something beneath the surface. Like a book on manners sent after a dinner party. A designer handbag that didn't match Emma's style. Now a necklace meant to tie her to a family name she hadn't asked to carry. Sometime past midnight, she sat up in bed. She walked to the dresser and looked at the box again. She didn't open it. She just stared at it, the same way one might stare at a painting in a gallery they couldn't quite understand. It wasn't the object itself that disturbed her. It was what it stood for, what it might be used to measure. Emma returned to bed and lay awake in the dark. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the windows. She listened to it, eyes open, waiting for the morning. The invitation arrived by email late Thursday afternoon. It was written in Victoria's usual style, concise, polished, and unmistakably formal despite the casual wording. She invited both Emma and Daniel to dinner on Sunday evening at her apartment. No occasion was mentioned, no reason offered. Just a line at the end, asking Emma if she might consider wearing the necklace. The message concluded with a small note about the menu and parking details, as if everything was already decided. Emma read it twice before forwarding it to Daniel. His response was immediate. He seemed pleased, even touched. He said his mother must be trying to connect more. He hoped this dinner would bring them closer. She agreed to go without hesitation, though her stomach had already begun to tighten. She closed her laptop and stood by the window for a while, watching the slow stream of people moving down on the street. From above, they looked small and far away. Detached. Sunday arrived without incident. Emma spent the morning organizing her project files and updating her calendar. The weather had cooled again, and she wore a light coat over a simple dress. Her hair was pulled back in a loose twist, and she chose earrings that had belonged to her own mother, quiet pieces that didn't draw much attention. She left the necklace in its box. When Daniel noticed, he said nothing at first. Only when they were already in the car, halfway to the Upper East Side, did he bring it up. He asked, lightly, whether she had forgotten to wear the necklace or simply chosen not to. She answered carefully. She said it didn't feel like the right time, that she wanted to wait for something more personal. He seemed to accept that, but the silence that followed was different than before. Not heavy, just longer. Victoria's building was as elegant as expected. The doorman greeted them by name, and the elevator rose smoothly to the top floor. Her apartment was bright and tastefully decorated, filled with expensive art, antique furniture, and the faint scent of something floral and faintly powdery. Victoria greeted them at the door with a practiced smile. Her dress was dark and tailored, her jewelry understated but unmistakably valuable. She embraced Daniel warmly, then turned to Emma with an expression that could have been interpreted a dozen ways. Emma offered polite compliments and accepted the drink handed to her. They made small talk in the living room before moving to the dining area, where the table had been set for 3. Everything was prepared with care, the lighting soft, the music low and classical. The dinner began pleasantly enough. Victoria asked about Emma's projects, about Daniel's office, about shared acquaintances. There were no sharp comments, no jabs disguised as jokes. Just a steady flow of questions and observations, delivered in her calm, level voice. But as the meal continued, the conversation shifted. Victoria asked again about the necklace. She wondered aloud if it had been the wrong style, or perhaps too delicate. She said it had always looked best on women with quiet strength, those who understood what it meant to carry family history with grace. Emma smiled, choosing her words carefully. She said the necklace was beautiful and she appreciated it deeply. But she hadn't felt ready to wear it just yet. She wanted the moment to feel meaningful. Victoria's smile didn't waver, but her eyes grew colder. She responded with a vague comment about personal readiness and timing, then changed the subject quickly, as though brushing away dust. The rest of the evening unfolded without incident, but something had shifted in the air. Emma noticed the subtle difference in Victoria's tone, the way she paused before answering, the slight narrowing of her eyes when Emma spoke. Nothing overt. Nothing anyone else might have noticed. But it was enough. After dessert, Victoria offered coffee in the sitting room. They moved to the softer chairs near the window. The skyline stretched out in every direction, glittering and cold. Victoria began talking about her own mother, a woman who had kept the family together after the war. She described her as strong, poised, unshakable. A woman who had taught her that every gesture mattered. Every detail. Nothing was ever just about appearances. Gifts, she said, revealed the character of both the giver and the receiver. Emma listened without interrupting. She folded her hands in her lap and stayed still. Victoria glanced at her briefly, then continued. She said traditions were difficult to explain to those who didn't come from them. Some people misunderstood the weight of legacy. They thought of things like necklaces as decoration, when in truth, they were responsibility. Daniel didn't say much during the story. He looked between the two women, sensing the direction but not yet seeing the edges. When they finally stood to leave, Victoria embraced Daniel again and held Emma's hands gently before letting go. She said she hoped the necklace would find its moment soon. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes held something sharper. Back in the car, Daniel drove quietly for a while. Then he said the dinner had gone well, better than expected. He said he was proud of them for trying. Emma looked out the window and nodded. She said it had been a good effort. But as the city lights blurred past, she couldn't ignore the strange chill that had settled around her. Something about the evening had left her more certain than ever that the necklace wasn't a gift. It was a test. One she hadn't agreed to take. Tuesday morning came with a pale sky and a restless wind. Emma stood in the kitchen, watching her tea steep as soft jazz played low from the speaker near the sink. Her calendar was full, but her thoughts refused to settle on work. Her eyes kept drifting toward the hallway, where her bedroom door stood slightly open, the necklace still resting on the dresser behind it. Unworn, untouched. She walked to the window and looked down at the street below. People moved with purpose, coats tucked, scarves tight. Everyone seemed to know where they were going. Emma had always appreciated structure, clarity. Lately, those things felt out of reach. Something about the past few days had shifted the ground beneath her in a quiet, almost invisible way. After breakfast, she returned to her workspace. The hotel project needed final revisions, and her inbox was full of client replies. She worked through the tasks steadily, her fingers quick over the keyboard, but her thoughts remained divided. By midday, she had made a decision. She picked up her phone and typed out a short message to her friend Leah, a jewelry consultant she'd known since design school. They had collaborated on a few boutique projects and kept in touch through occasional meetups and messages. Emma asked if Leah was free that afternoon. She wanted her opinion on something. No urgency, she wrote, just curiosity. Leah replied within minutes. She had an opening at 2. Emma didn't mention the necklace in the message. She simply said she had a piece she wanted examined, and it wasn't for a client. She left the apartment with the black velvet box tucked in her bag. The ride to Leah's studio was short, but each passing block made her chest feel tighter. She tried to convince herself that this was nothing, just a quiet attempt to satisfy a persistent feeling. Still, she kept checking the clasp on her purse, making sure the box hadn't shifted. Leah's studio was a small, sunlit space on the second floor of an old brick building. Glass display cases lined the walls, each one holding pieces that ranged from modern to antique, all handcrafted, all deliberate. Emma always liked being there. It smelled faintly of cedar and silver polish. Leah greeted her with a quick hug and led her to the back, where a small desk was set up with tools, magnifiers, and a jeweler's lamp. They chatted briefly, catching up on work and city life. Emma avoided specifics. Then, when the moment felt natural, she pulled out the box and placed it on the table between them. Leah raised an eyebrow at the presentation, then opened the lid slowly. Her reaction was immediate but controlled. She lifted the necklace with careful fingers, holding it up to the light. She said it was exquisite. Vintage, clearly. Probably early 20th century. The diamonds were real, of course, and set in platinum. The design was rare, possibly custom. She studied the clasp, the links, the placement of the stones. Emma asked if there was anything unusual about it. Leah hesitated. Then she said the craftsmanship was flawless, but something caught her attention. She pointed to the central pendant, an oval shape slightly larger than the others, with a delicate filigree design on the back. She noted that it seemed heavier than expected. Emma watched as Leah retrieved a small magnifier and a soft cloth. She examined the pendant closely, then reached for a tiny tool and pressed gently along the edge. A faint click sounded. The pendant opened. Inside, instead of an inscription or keepsake, there was a small compartment. And in that compartment, a nearly invisible sliver of plastic. Leah leaned closer, frowning. She said it looked like a storage chip. Maybe for digital data. It was smaller than a fingernail, embedded cleanly into the setting. Emma felt her chest tighten. Leah asked if the necklace had come with anything else, papers, a certificate, any background. Emma shook her head. She explained it had been a gift from her mother-in-law, with no further details. Leah said it wasn't common to find such things in jewelry, especially not of this kind. She suggested removing it carefully and checking it with a computer. It might be nothing, she added quickly. Maybe a design feature. Or a novelty someone added later. Emma nodded, but her fingers were cold. They removed the chip gently and placed it in a small case. Leah handed it to her without asking further questions. Emma thanked her, promised to update her later, and left with the necklace sealed back in its box. Back home, the apartment felt quiet in a way that made her ears ring. She sat at her desk, the chip now resting beside her laptop. She stared at it for several minutes. Eventually, she connected a card reader to her computer and slid the chip inside. At first, nothing happened. Then a small folder appeared on the screen. Inside were several audio files, each labeled by date and time. She opened one at random. The voices were unmistakable, hers and Daniel's. The recording was recent. A conversation they had in the living room 3 nights ago about the hotel project and their weekend plans. Her hands trembled slightly as she clicked on the next. This one captured their kitchen the morning after her birthday. Background noise. Her voice. His voice. Casual, intimate, unaware. She closed the folder and removed the chip. The necklace hadn't been a gesture. It had been a tool. Emma sat back in her chair, staring at the window, the city beyond it suddenly feeling less familiar. The room around her remained unchanged, but the silence had turned sharp. The box was still on the dresser. The necklace still glittered. But something inside her had shifted. The weight she had felt from the beginning had finally revealed its shape. The next morning, the city moved forward as usual, but for Emma, time slowed. She hadn't slept much. Her mind ran in loops through the night, replaying each recording, each word, and each silence that she hadn't thought twice about before. The betrayal didn't roar. It whispered. And that made it harder to ignore. She got out of bed before sunrise, made coffee in the dark, and sat at the dining table with the small storage chip resting in front of her like a paperweight. Her laptop was closed. The box that held the necklace was now locked away in the hallway drawer. Just knowing it had been in the bedroom made her skin crawl. When Daniel emerged, he greeted her with a soft smile, still half asleep. He sat across from her and asked if she had trouble sleeping. She nodded, said she'd been thinking about work. She didn't mention the recordings. Not yet. He kissed her forehead and got ready for the day. As he left, he asked if she wanted to have dinner out that evening, just the two of them. She agreed, told him to pick the place. He smiled and disappeared through the door. Once she was alone again, she opened her laptop. She played one more recording, just to make sure it had been real and not the product of a restless mind. The voices played clearly. Her own laughter. Daniel's low murmur. Their conversation had been simple, meaningless. But now, with the knowledge of being watched, even the lightest exchange felt invaded. She closed the file and shut the laptop firmly. By midday, she found herself in the back room of her old friend's office. She had called James that morning, someone she had once worked with on a renovation project. He now ran a small digital forensics firm that handled everything from corporate investigations to private cases. She trusted him. He didn't ask unnecessary questions when she requested a quiet review of a piece of jewelry. He examined the necklace without judgment. He confirmed what she already suspected: audio surveillance embedded in the central pendant. The chip recorded sound whenever movement was detected, and once paired with a nearby phone, it would automatically transfer the files. The system wasn't expensive or military grade. It was consumer level and accessible. But it had been hidden well. James asked if she wanted a copy of the data. She said yes. He gave her a USB stick and a written summary of the chip's design and function. He asked if she planned to report it. She didn't answer. Not yet. Back at home, she placed the documents in a folder and tucked them into her desk drawer, far from where Daniel might see them by accident. She sat in silence for several minutes, trying to map out her next steps. The questions were piling up. Had Victoria planned this from the beginning? How long had she been listening? Why go this far? Emma thought of the quiet comments at dinner, the remarks about tradition and loyalty. Victoria's suggestion that the necklace wasn't just jewelry, but a symbol of trust. It had never been about beauty. It had been a leash. She replayed memories with new clarity, moments where Victoria had asked questions she shouldn't have known to ask. Subtle mentions of private conversations. Opinions that felt too aligned with things said behind closed doors. The connection was obvious now. Emma considered telling Daniel that evening over dinner. But the weight of the truth felt too large to drop between wine glasses and candlelight. She knew how much he loved his mother, how fiercely he defended her, even while acknowledging her flaws. Hearing this might destroy something in him. Not just his trust in Victoria, but something deeper. Still, she couldn't hide it much longer. That night, as they walked through the neighborhood to a small Italian place Daniel had chosen, she debated how to begin. The restaurant was cozy and dimly lit, tucked between two bookstores, with old wood floors and flickering candlelight on every table. It had the kind of warmth that made everything feel easier. But her thoughts didn't soften. They ordered pasta and wine. They talked about his work, about a new client who couldn't make up his mind about anything. She laughed at the right moments, asked questions, kept her tone light. But he noticed. Halfway through the meal, he leaned forward, his voice low. He asked if she was really all right. She said she was tired. That work had been demanding. That she just needed a quiet weekend. He reached for her hand and squeezed it. Said he understood. Said he'd take care of everything Saturday so she could rest. She nodded and smiled. She meant the smile, but it wasn't the full truth. After dinner, they walked home slowly. The air had cooled, and Emma pulled her coat tighter around her. Daniel told a story about a childhood trip with Victoria to a museum, how she had explained every painting with such authority, even the ones she didn't understand. He chuckled softly at the memory. Emma said nothing. She wanted to protect him, but protection couldn't mean silence forever. When they reached home, Daniel went to shower, and Emma sat again at her desk. The USB stick rested near the corner. She stared at it for a long time. The necklace had been given to her with a smile. But behind that smile had been something cold, something exact. It hadn't been an attempt to connect. It had been a way to control, to monitor, to measure. She knew what she had to do. The only question now was when. Thursday passed without incident. Emma went through her workday with measured calm, speaking with clients, adjusting design layouts, and finalizing invoices. She answered emails without delay, organized her studio space, and even took a short walk in the afternoon sun to clear her head. From the outside, it was an ordinary day. But beneath it all, her thoughts remained fixed on the USB drive in her desk and the growing weight of what it represented. That evening, after Daniel returned from work, they ate dinner together without any mention of the necklace or Victoria. He seemed in good spirits. He talked about a new team member in his department and how they'd managed to finally close a difficult account. Emma listened, nodded, and smiled at the right moments, though her mind wasn't fully present. Later that night, as Daniel read on the couch, Emma sat across from him with a cup of tea, the warmth barely reaching her hands. She watched him quietly for a while. He looked peaceful, unbothered, trusting. The thought of disrupting that calm tightened something in her chest. She asked if he remembered Daniel's ex-fiancée, the one he had dated briefly before they met. He looked up and nodded. Said they hadn't been together very long, just a few months. It had ended without much drama, though his mother had been unusually quiet about it. Emma asked if he ever wondered why she had left so suddenly. He thought for a moment, then shrugged. He had assumed it hadn't been the right fit. They'd wanted different things. Emma waited a few beats before asking if Victoria had ever given her any gifts. He thought harder, then said yes. There had been a bracelet. A family piece. His mother had said it symbolized tradition. Emma nodded slowly and didn't say more. She let the thought hang in the air before steering the conversation elsewhere. It was too soon to reveal everything. She needed more. The next day, she reached out to an old friend from her university days, a woman named Maya who now worked in private security consulting. They hadn't spoken in years, but the connection had always been solid. Emma explained only the essentials, that she had questions about a gift and needed help tracing some information discreetly. They met at a quiet coffee shop near Midtown. Emma brought the documents James had given her, along with a printed image of the necklace. Maya reviewed everything in silence, then looked up with a careful expression. She asked if Emma had ever noticed her home electronics behaving strangely, unusual phone interference, Wi-Fi issues, unexpected battery drain. Emma thought back and realized there had been a few odd moments, but she had never connected them. Maya said it was possible the necklace had been part of a broader pattern. She offered to do a sweep of the apartment the following week. In the meantime, she would try to trace the source of the tracking chip and determine if it had been registered to a particular account. Emma thanked her, feeling both comforted and unsettled. The further she went, the clearer the shape of Victoria's involvement became. But with clarity came risk. That night, back at home, Emma sat with her laptop open and her finger hovering over the folder that contained the recordings. She played one again, not from her own apartment this time, but from a file dated several weeks before the birthday dinner. The conversation between Victoria and someone else was quiet, muffled. But one line was clear. She said that the necklace would help her understand if Emma was hiding anything, that it was better to be cautious than blind. Emma's stomach turned. It hadn't just been about loyalty or tradition. It had been suspicion. Surveillance dressed as sentiment. She saved the recording separately and labeled it. Then she began organizing everything: timestamps, file names, screenshots. She printed James's report, Maya's initial notes, and her own observations. She placed it all in a folder marked with only one word: evidence. It was late when she finally stood. Daniel was asleep. The apartment was quiet. She walked to the hallway drawer and opened it. The black velvet box was still there. She pulled it out and carried it to the balcony. The city stretched in every direction, windows flickering, lives continuing. She opened the box and looked at the necklace one more time. The diamonds caught the light, still perfect, still cold. She didn't throw it. Not yet. But she knew she would never wear it. Inside, she placed the box in a bag and tucked it beneath her desk, away from sight. The next morning, she called the jeweler who had appraised the piece and asked for a formal valuation. Not to sell it, but to prepare for the conversation she knew was coming. She spent the rest of the day gathering the last pieces of information. Her phone rang once in the early afternoon. It was Maya. She had found a registered email address linked to the surveillance chip. It belonged to Victoria. Saturday began with a stillness that felt unnatural. Emma woke before the alarm, the light outside still soft and blue. Daniel slept beside her, his breathing steady, one arm draped loosely over the blanket. She lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing the words she had repeated in her mind all night. She had avoided the truth long enough. The facts were now undeniable, and silence was no longer an option. She rose quietly, made coffee, and sat at the table with the folder she had prepared. Pages were stacked neatly inside, evidence from James's analysis, a transcript of one of the clearer recordings, the chip's registration details, and notes from Maya's findings. The information was enough to prove intent. More than enough. She heard the shuffle of Daniel's footsteps down the hall and closed the folder. When he entered the room, his face softened into a sleepy smile. He kissed the top of her head and asked if she wanted to go out for breakfast. She hesitated before answering. She said they needed to talk first. His brow furrowed, but he nodded. They sat together at the table, Emma with her hands folded, Daniel waiting, unsure. She began by saying something had been bothering her for weeks. He listened quietly. She reached into the drawer and retrieved the folder. She opened it, sliding the first page across to him. It took time for him to absorb the contents. His fingers moved slowly through the pages, his eyes scanning each word with growing confusion. Then disbelief. Then silence. When he reached the audio transcript, he read it twice. She told him how she had discovered the hidden compartment, how Leah had uncovered the chip, and how James had confirmed what it was. She explained that she had waited because she wasn't sure how to say it, or what it would do to him. He asked how many recordings there were. She said over a dozen. Some from their home, some from conversations with others, and one involving Victoria directly. He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, his mouth set in a firm line. His eyes didn't meet hers for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried weight. He asked if she was sure. She said yes. He stood and walked to the window, arms still folded. He stayed there for a long while. Emma didn't follow. She gave him space, watching his reflection as he stared out over the neighborhood. Eventually, he turned around and asked why. Not why Emma had waited. Why his mother had done it. Emma said she didn't know. But the recording where Victoria mentioned suspicion made it clear enough. There had never been trust. Only control. He looked at the folder again, then sat back down. He asked if Emma believed his mother had done this alone or with help. Emma said it didn't matter. The intent had been hers. The device had been chosen, installed, and registered by her. He picked up one of the pages, studied it, then placed it back down. His hands were steady, but his jaw was tense. He asked when Emma had planned to confront her. She said she wasn't sure. But now that he knew, they could decide together. He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said they would go see her. Not today, not with emotions still high. Tomorrow. He needed time to gather his thoughts. She nodded. The rest of the day passed in near silence. They didn't argue. They didn't fight. But the space between them had changed. Not broken, but stretched thin by a truth too large to ignore. Emma went through her tasks slowly, distracted. Daniel spent most of the afternoon on the balcony, phone in hand, but not making calls. He stared at nothing. Thought deeply. Occasionally, he would look at her, his expression unreadable. That night, neither of them slept well. The weight of what was coming pressed against the walls of the apartment. Emma heard the sounds of the city in the background, but even they seemed distant, as though muffled by the realization that their life had been intruded on in a way that could not be undone. By morning, Daniel was up early. He dressed without speaking, made coffee, and checked his phone. He said they should leave around 10. Emma agreed. They rode in silence. The city passed by in a blur. When they reached Victoria's building, they didn't stop at the front desk. Daniel led the way, his shoulders squared, his expression firm. They rode the elevator to the top floor, the folder tucked under his arm. Emma's hands were cold, but steady. When the door opened, Victoria smiled. Her eyes flicked to their faces and dimmed. She asked if something was wrong. Daniel didn't answer. He walked inside. Emma followed. They sat in the living room, the same place where Victoria had once told stories of tradition and duty. Daniel placed the folder on the coffee table and opened it. He said they needed to talk. Victoria didn't speak at first. She looked through the pages slowly, as if pretending to not understand. Then she closed the folder and sat back. Her posture was straight. Her face unreadable. Daniel asked if it was true. Victoria said very little. She asked what Emma had been so afraid to share. She said she had only wanted to understand her better. That privacy was a small price for peace of mind. Daniel's voice rose, but only slightly. He said it wasn't peace of mind. It was betrayal. Manipulation. A violation of trust. Victoria kept her tone smooth. She said she had raised him alone. That she had always done what she thought was necessary. That Emma didn't understand what it meant to protect something valuable. Emma said nothing. Daniel stood. He said their relationship couldn't continue like this. That until trust was rebuilt, if it ever could be, there would be distance. Victoria didn't argue. She only said she hoped he would see things differently in time. They left. The elevator ride down was long and quiet. When they stepped onto the street, Daniel took a deep breath. He didn't speak right away. He just walked, hands in his pockets, head low. Emma walked beside him, silent, waiting. The days that followed were quieter than Emma expected. Daniel didn't speak much about the confrontation. He didn't bring up his mother, the necklace, or the folder still sitting on the hallway table. But the silence between them wasn't cold. It was thoughtful. It was the kind of stillness that came not from distance, but from sorting through something that had cracked at the center. On Monday, he went to work early and returned late. He looked tired when he got home, but not angry. Just changed. Emma watched him carefully, not pushing, not asking. She knew the weight he carried was his alone to process. She kept their home peaceful, clean, predictable. Her own work filled the hours. She threw herself into finalizing 2 design projects and began sketching ideas for a nursery renovation a new client had asked about. She found comfort in the rhythm of creation, choosing textures, matching palettes, building something beautiful from nothing. In the evenings, they shared quiet dinners and soft music. Daniel often sat with a book but didn't seem to read. Emma let him be. On Thursday, she found a letter in the mailbox. The envelope was thick and pale gray. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Victoria's handwriting was clean, composed. The message was short. She wrote that she had reflected on their conversation, that she had acted out of fear, not malice, that perhaps her methods had been wrong, but her intentions had always been to protect. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply said she hoped they would understand one day. Emma placed the letter on the kitchen counter and left it there. That evening, she showed it to Daniel. He read it twice and folded it again. Then he placed it in the same drawer as the folder, without a word. Friday morning, Emma received a message from Maya. The final digital traces of the surveillance system had been erased. There were no further connections to any active account. The system had been shut down. Relief came slowly, like a tide pulling back. Emma didn't feel victory, just calm. She stepped onto the balcony and watched the city move. The necklace still sat in the drawer. She had no intention of keeping it, but she hadn't yet decided what to do with it. That night, Daniel joined her outside. They sat in silence, shoulders touching. Eventually, he spoke. He said he had called a counselor, someone recommended by a colleague. He wanted to talk through everything. His childhood, his mother's presence in it, the patterns he hadn't noticed. Emma nodded and said she thought it was a good idea. He looked at her then, eyes tired but steady. He asked how she had felt through it all. She answered slowly. She said she had felt watched, measured, judged, but never broken. Not once. He reached for her hand. The weekend arrived with softer skies. On Saturday, they walked through the park, stopping for coffee from a vendor near the lake. Emma wore a coat Daniel had given her 2 winters ago, and he wore the scarf she had knit last year. They looked like any couple, but something about them had shifted. Their steps were more in sync, their words more intentional. Later, they visited a small gallery Emma had been meaning to see. As they stood before a series of abstract pieces, Daniel turned to her and asked if she still had the necklace. She said yes. He asked what she planned to do with it. She said she hadn't decided. He suggested donating it, turning it into something useful. He didn't want it in their home. She agreed. They spent the rest of the day planning their next project together. A quiet trip, a few days by the coast. No phones, no expectations, just rest. On Sunday morning, Emma packed the necklace into a padded envelope and addressed it to an organization that supported women rebuilding their lives after domestic surveillance and abuse. She didn't sign her name. She simply wrote a note saying the piece came with a difficult history and hoped it might now serve a better purpose. She dropped it in the mail and didn't look back. When she returned home, Daniel was waiting with 2 mugs of coffee and the weekend paper. He asked if she had done it. She nodded. They sat together on the couch, the morning light stretching across the rug, warm and quiet. Nothing extraordinary had happened, but everything felt different. Something broken had been laid bare. And now, piece by piece, they were learning how to build again. 1 year passed. The apartment was no longer in Brooklyn. They had moved in early spring, just after the snow had melted and the first buds appeared on the trees. Their new home sat on a quiet street in a smaller neighborhood just outside the city. It had a little yard with uneven stone paths and an old oak tree that leaned slightly toward the house like it was listening. The walls were freshly painted, the shelves lined with books and photographs. Everything inside felt chosen. Nothing reminded them of what they had left behind. Emma stood in the kitchen on a Saturday morning, barefoot, her hair still damp from the shower. The kettle was whistling and sunlight poured in through the wide windows above the sink. The garden outside was full of color now. She had planted it herself, a little at a time. Rosemary, lavender, small white roses, and tomatoes in deep red clusters. The routine of caring for them had become its own kind of healing. Daniel entered the room holding a folded newspaper in one hand and a small box in the other. He set them both on the table and kissed her on the cheek. He asked if she wanted orange juice or tea. She smiled and told him she had already boiled the water. They ate breakfast slowly, the kind of morning that didn't need to be rushed. They talked about small things, grocery lists, a neighbor's dog, an article he had read about sleep patterns. It was the kind of quiet happiness that didn't ask to be named. Later, they walked through the garden together. Daniel bent to pull weeds while Emma trimmed dead leaves from the basil plant. They worked side by side without speaking. The silence was easy. Inside, a room stood ready. Painted pale green, with soft yellow curtains and a shelf lined with stuffed animals and storybooks. A crib stood near the window, already fitted with a patterned sheet Emma had sewn by hand. The baby was due in a few weeks. Emma rested one hand on her belly, the other steadying herself against the doorframe. She breathed in the scent of the nursery, new wood, cotton, a faint trace of lavender. It felt like the start of something far from everything they had known. Not a second chapter, but a different book entirely. They still heard from Victoria once in a while. A card at holidays. A message sent through someone else. She hadn't apologized. But she hadn't tried to reach them directly since the letter. Daniel had continued his counseling, week by week, peeling back the layers of a lifetime lived under his mother's watch. He never shared every detail, but Emma saw the change in him, in how he spoke, how he listened, how he understood boundaries in a way he hadn't before. One afternoon, as summer faded into autumn, a small parcel arrived. No return address. Inside was a soft gray baby blanket, hand-stitched, with a tiny embroidered flower in one corner. Tucked into the folds was a note written in Victoria's familiar hand. It said only that the blanket had belonged to Daniel. That she thought it might be useful now. No demands. No assumptions. Just the item and the memory. Emma showed it to Daniel. He held it for a moment, then placed it on the nursery shelf. Neither of them spoke. Nothing more was needed. As the days grew shorter and the nights cooler, Emma found herself waking early more often. She would sit near the nursery window and listen to the sounds of the morning, the rustle of leaves, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant call of birds returning to their nests. She found comfort in the quiet. One morning, just before the baby was due, she stood by the garden gate watching the light spread across the lawn. Daniel joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, resting his hand over hers. They didn't talk about the necklace anymore. It belonged to a part of their story that no longer held power. They had taken something sharp and hidden and turned it into something known. Something dealt with. Something gone. As they stood there, the wind moved gently through the trees. Emma looked up at the sky and felt something she hadn't in a long time. Stillness. Not the kind that comes from fear, but the kind that follows understanding. She turned to Daniel and smiled, her hand resting again on the curve of her stomach. He looked at her and smiled back, the lines around his eyes deepening with warmth. Together, they walked inside. The future was waiting. But for now, they had everything they needed.